Hello, everyone. Welcome in. I wanted to provide us an update, seeing as there was no decision for the Alexee Trevizo case published by the July 15th deadline. Now, there seems to be about 15 cases, including the Alexee Trevizo case, that were not decided by this deadline. And a few of them, including the Alexee Trevizo case, are matters of serious significance, which take time and may also have dissenting and concurring opinions. Now, something to be of note, this deadline does not have any impact on the cases. The deadline is an internal deadline for the New Mexico Supreme Court to attempt to not have backlogs and, get backed up with decisions that can sit for 3, 5+ years at a time sometimes. And so with this, they are attempting to get all these decisions done in a timely manner by implementing these terms, but it is not like a statutory rule that anything will happen to these cases should they not have been decided on time. The Supreme Court, since this deadline has been enacted, has been able to make the deadline, but this year they were not. And so with that, we can assume that the Alexee Trevizo trial is still stayed, which means it's paused. It is in the same, realm that it has been, as well as the 2 civil lawsuits that accompany it. They're all stayed pending this decision because this Supreme Court decision for Alexee Trevizo not only impacts the evidence for the criminal trial, but also will seriously impact how both civil cases move forward based on what the Supreme Court decides. And technically, if the Supreme Court sides mostly in favor of the state, it is potentially likely that the civil cases would suffer a massive blow, potentially to the brink of defeat, because if the Supreme Court does not say that Alexee's rights were violated, they do not say that the hospital broke privilege in any way, and that all of this was allowed to be done and said and used in trial against Alexee, the claims for the civil lawsuit that Alexee Trevizo is bringing against the police and the hospital would fall short, and then the wrongful death lawsuit would also likely fall extremely short because there would not be any extra claims as far as breach of duty and breaking privilege and HIPAA, all the stuff that Team Trevizo will be claiming in the wrongful death suit as well. And so this decision impacts all of those cases, and it also impacts future justice. And, the reason that this case is okay for it taking so long is because essentially when the judge decided to suppress all of this evidence, they didn't cite any case law. Now, this precedent, if it's going to be set by a suppression, needs to have a reasoning behind it, because it does not only impact justice for baby Alex, it impacts justice for children of New Mexico in the future. It impacts privilege, Miranda, and mandatory reporting going forward. And if mandatory reporting is changed into how the defense would be requesting, children who end up deceased while they or their parents are associating with a medical provider that could possibly end up being an abuse type situation, if the child is deceased, they would no longer be considered a mandatory report, and it wouldn't waive privilege. It would just be interpreted as a suspicious death. That is what the defense is asking for. Now, that would restrict the investigation powers and the waiver of privilege that anyone trying to solve any of these issues of child abuse potentially resulting in murder would have. That's a big deal. That's something that takes time, and as unfortunate as us waiting is, it is worth this being done correctly, not only for justice for baby Alex, but for future justice of the children of New Mexico. Now, personally, this is why I believe it's taking so long, because not only is this a big decision, as we've been talking about, that would either uphold or completely change precedent in many ways, there is likely a holdout justice with a dissenting opinion. And my guess, this is all just a guess, is that it's possibly Justice Vigil, and that they're probably the minority opinion, and they are most likely being held up on the idea of the police being in the hospital room with privilege, and they do not like the potential future for police investigations in hospitals or medical care settings. Now, I say all this because Justice Vigil seemed to have strong reactions, if my memory serves correctly, about this particular issue. And I think that would likely be the point of contention. And this is why it can cause significant delays. How the Supreme Court works is after oral argument, there would be a vote, an initial vote that would take place. And then the majority, whoever wins on essentially upholding or reversing this decision, the majority will have one person write their opinion. Once that opinion is ready, it would circulate through the rest of the justices. Then the justices have their opportunity to write concurring or dissenting opinions. Then once all of the concurring and dissenting opinions are submitted, the person writing the majority opinion gets the chance to rewrite it. And this can happen over and over and over again, because if the dissenting opinion has points that the majority opinion wants to shield from, wants to address within their opinion, they could continue to rewrite it, or they could continue to kind of essentially debate within these main opinions and dissenting opinions or concurring opinions. It is also possible, this is a more positive outlook, and just like in the law, we never look at the more positive potential. We always start with the negative and then work our way up, because you never want to be too hopeful. And if you get lucky in the end, you're lucky, but you start with the most negative. Now, what could also possibly be happening is a rewrite based on the concurring opinions as well, just because there's a possible split, which would be either 3-2 or 4-1. I'm leaning more towards 4-1, but there was one justice that I couldn't fully get a read on, and they could possibly be on the side of Justice Vigil, potentially, from how I was interpreting it, but also it could just be 4-1 and that justice was quiet. But when it comes to the concurring opinions, they could also be bringing up things that the majority opinion writer did not include, which would cause them to go back and redraft to include even more information in the majority opinion from those concurring opinions. And so with that, there is many reasons why this can take a long time that are not negative necessarily. The fact that it is possibly a split decision only simply means that either one side has already won to some degree. We just don't know the reasoning behind it. And we, can keep up hope in the sense of, not really even being worried for the sake of what this outcome is when it comes simply to the trial for Alexee Trevizo. Obviously, I think that the correct decision needs to come out for future justice in New Mexico when it comes to the use of evidence and investigating, children who are found dead and could possibly be abused and not seen as simply a suspicious death. But again, that's just my opinion on how the outcome needs to be seen. I'm not worried about this particular case in and of itself, because as we've said on this channel many, many times since this evidence was suppressed, since it was appealed, is that technically the state has everything they need already still to make this case. They have the autopsy and the hallway footage of Alexee Trevizo running in and out of that bathroom, and that footage is ominous. The jury, I think, in my opinion, will be very, it'll be very easy for them to go from seeing Alexee in the bathroom to seeing her come out of the bathroom, and how all that played out, they'll jump right to guilty. That's just how I see it. They're not gonna, if all this evidence stays suppressed, there's no explanation behind it. It just looks like Alexee tried to get away from the hospital staff to have this baby and kill it. That is what it will register to the jury when all they see is the autopsy report and the hallway footage. Do you think they really are going to believe Alexee had no idea when she ended up making it to the bathroom at the exact moment of giving birth and secluding herself and continuing to seclude herself after having given birth? That really undercuts and does not lean towards the defense's favor in any way when it comes to the intent behind how and why baby Alex ended up in the trash. Is the jury more likely to believe that baby Alex was a stillborn and Alexee panicked, having no idea? Or are they more likely to believe that Alexee knew exactly what was happening, and that's why she ended up in the bathroom and why baby Alex ended up concealed and no one knew? That is the question that the fact finder, the jury, will ultimately be tasked with. And in this case, we don't need all that evidence to make that case. A very circumstantial case with exact evidence that we have that's not suppressed can lead to a guilty verdict on murder one, premeditation and all. That's just my opinion. But another reason why I'm not worried, and we've discussed this on this channel, is because even if all this evidence stays suppressed, Team Trevizo is basically, they'll be given the ball, but they won't be able to shoot it, right? We can put the ball in their hands and the ball's in their court, but they can't do much at trial as far as posing a defense when their defense that they put on record at oral argument themselves is stillbirth. And for a second, we can take a look here at 11504D3, which is not what's been argued yet. They are arguing over 11504D4, which is mandatory reporting and the rule of evidence surrounding that as an exception. Now, when it comes to 11504D3, it says if a patient relies on a physical, mental, or emotional condition as part of a claim or defense, no privilege shall apply concerning confidential communications made relevant to that condition. After a patient's death, should any party rely on a patient's physical, mental, or emotional condition as part of a claim or defense, no privilege shall apply for confidential communications made relevant to that condition. So essentially, this covers Alexee Trevizo's case on both ends. Not only is it Alexee's potential confidential communications, but also anything that could relate to the deceased party, which would be baby Alex's death. And so this is mainly used in like civil cases when people are suing civilly, but it could be extremely relevant and still could apply. It is a rule of evidence, not just for civil cases in New Mexico. So if Alexee Trevizo's defense is how they've posed it and put on record at oral argument that they will essentially be saying baby Alex was a stillbirth and that the hospital never told Alexee she was pregnant, yada, 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 that would kick the door wide open at trial for all this suppressed evidence to come back in. Because just because the Supreme Court could suppress all of it does not mean it's gone forever. All it means is that there's basically a bomb being handed to Team Trevizo and saying, blow it up if you want. That's really where they're at with this. Because as you can see by 11504D3, the arguments and things that Team Trevizo are asking for are so completely out of bounds of the rules that have already been put in place that the best that the Supreme Court could do if they wanted to suppress is potentially even mention this exception, 11504D3, and say, we will suppress based on upholding the potential, Miranda rights and privilege for future New Mexico citizens, and we want to take a stand against police officers entering a hospital room, period. But, enter at your own risk when it comes to Team Trevizo, because in your case, you happen to have potentially committed a crime at a hospital, which has the law already really parsed out. And so should this evidence be suppressed based on the Supreme Court standard, the door can still be left open in trial. And the Supreme Court may even mention something like that if they were to suppress, because this is a surefire way to have trial just be really chaotic or really, unsettled. And this potentially needs to be mentioned by the Supreme Court, because it needs to be clear that if they do suppress all this evidence moving forward, Team Trevizo is the one who would open the door and allow all the suppressed evidence to come back in. And it would come back in as rebuttal evidence at that case, because the defense would be using this as their defense. They would somehow, either on cross-examination or in their case in chief, open the door to allowing this medical information back in. And if that happens, it will look really bad for Team Trevizo, because the state will have already done what they needed to do with that witness or with their case, and will now get to present a whole bunch more evidence that they didn't get to show that would just prove that the defense is lying, in my opinion, right? That's how it will probably read to the jury if the defense gets up there and tries to be like, for the first time they hear from medical professionals and they say, well, you never told her she was pregnant, right? Because if the state was barred from asking that, but then the defense says no one told Alexee she was pregnant, that could open up all the statements, like Rosa saying that she had, asked Alexee to just tell her the truth. Any of the conversations that the medical providers had with her, Alexee denying pregnancy to the medical providers. If the defense wants to get in there and open up the door and actually defend Alexee, then all this evidence is coming back in anyways. The only thing we should be worried about is the future precedent set for mandatory reporting for the children of New Mexico, because I do not agree with the, just even the ethics behind the defense's argument. I do not think that rights were violated enough in any way, shape, or form in Alexee Trevizo's case to upend the rights of future abused children. I just don't think that that's a fair or ethical way to approach this case. That's just my opinion. And so, we are waiting a decision at this point. I do think it's likely to come in early September or at the beginning of the term, unless for some reason these dissenting opinions and rewrites keep happening, or there's some crazy stalemate that is happening behind doors that we just can't seem to get through. People can switch sides as justices. They can switch sides in the middle of a thing, and who knows that it could flop the majority to the minority. It could things can happen all throughout this, and so unless this continues on in an adversarial process, potentially with these justices, with debating and continuing rewrites, they can obviously publish the opinion with dissenting opinions, but they will do their best to make the actual opinion as full and accurate as possible. And so, anytime these rewrites are happening, hopefully whatever majority decision is being written is just getting sharper and sharper. But they don't have to publish the decision, as soon as it's decided, and these are the concurring and dissenting opinions, and there's that. That's just not how it goes. They could continuously keep debating on this. And as much as it is disheartening, annoying, we wish we had it now. Of course, I do. I was really looking forward to this end date, just because it's been so long already. But just because that's how we feel, it does not mean that's what's right for this case, for this decision, ultimately for justice for baby Alex, and for mandatory reporting in the future in New Mexico. And so with that, I will continue to keep updating on any of the legal issues surrounding Alexee Trevizo's criminal case or civil cases. Everything is pretty much paused right now, and the Supreme Court will likely be taking a break and coming back for their fall term. And when that happens, we will be on the ready for this decision to drop. And no matter what, I would like to say thank you to everyone who's kept up the hope, held their head up high while we have waited, while justice for baby Alex is lost at every single turn. And I can promise you there is light at the end of the tunnel. We are getting as close as we can possibly be. And it is so fitting for just how this case has gone for the side of justice for baby Alex that, of course, it would go a little bit past the deadline. And of course, it would be one in the batch that didn't get decided within the terms. And so that's okay. We will keep an eye out. No matter what, we are going to continue the fight for justice for baby Alex. Thank you for being here for so long, for 3 years, to those of you who've been here from the beginning and continue to keep an eye out and watch for the updates in this case. We will never stop. There will be justice for baby Alex. It should go Friday. I'll see you in the next video. Okay, bye.